Good morning. I have the same problem. My Portuguese is horrible, so I will try to speak Spanish slowly. My name is Carlos Martinez. I am the technology manager for LACNIC. We work together with NIC.br at several projects for many, many years. I'm very happy to be here. This is the first time I make it, so thank you for the invitation. Today I'm here to talk about RPKI. Who knows about that? Who has heard about it? Let's start talking about BGP. BGP is the protocol that we use to keep internet binded, to be precise, or to have routes over the prefixes throughout routers that work among themselves. BGP is defined as a protocol-based routing by rumor. When the neighbor tells you that the neighbor is going out with another guy, it's a rumor, yes? Gossips, maybe. And that's how we route the internet, because there is no mechanisms between edges to inform that information or to pass that information. In this example, Internet is defined in one slide. We have two autonomous systems which they try to communicate one to another, and they have one which is closer, which is the provider router, and they believe that that provider will be very honest in propagating that rumor. Well, there is no need to go into details about BGP, right? Then they define the routes and they establish data flow. BGP is a protocol which is very complex, and the heart of BGP is within the attributes. Every time you announce it, they become rumors. They are parameters that follow for this ad. So we have to remember one of these attributes. There are so many, but let's remember about the IS path. What is the AS path? AS path, which autonomous systems ad goes through the internet passages. In this case, the announcement goes through 1, 2, 3. The first autonomous system of AS path is very interesting because we know as origin is an autonomous system which injects that in the internet. Why am I saying that? Because this is exactly what we are trying to do at the RPKI, to give some security to that origin announcement. AS path, AS origin, they are important because they allow to select the pathway to propagate an announcement. We have a path sequence, 12 of them, saying which attribute to be stated first before we decided about potential pathways. And what we will introduce as a product of the whole development of RPKI is a next step that will help us to have an additional decisional element. How about the rumors? If there is a sequestration, a malicious player, or any misleading. In Uruguay, there is a common social character, which is the old lady of the neighborhood who propagates all the gossips and rumors. and she gives her own style how she propagates that information. The end product can be many. If we have a third player, third actor in this neighborhood, what happens? They put a rumor, they put an announcement, an ad, but then that can be very malicious because they may announce a part of the original block of the ASDS. I have that in red to show that he's a bad one. What happens? In the absence of other mechanisms to the internet routers, all rumors are the same. The ALS 66 rumor is not worse or better than others, so they will accept like others. And what is the problem? ALS 66 was not the owner of the pathways, and doing that, they will redirect part of the traffic because, in fact, they will correlate the traffic. S27. This type of event is known as route sequestration. That can be malicious. And the problem is in case case of Pakistan, Telecom Pakistan, is there anyone who hasn't heard about the case Pakistan Telco? Well, everyone knows, right? That was widely known. Pakistan Telecom announced to the YouTube networks throughout a internet provider. And the effect is a self-delegation of service. The problem with that, though, is that that can be malicious in a sense that they are announcing 124 more announcements, less specifics. And as that is a slash 24, they cannot use against YouTube updating the 24 prefixes, or maybe to announce shorter things because in reality they are filtered. So here you will all note that I had simplified this, and internet accepts any announcement anyhow. The problem, though, is that those mechanisms which are implemented to control announcements are ours, or to place filters for a good practice. When you have a BGP session with a client, you put a filter, you just accept the routes that the client says yes. And I want to believe that in a manual way, those routes, they are in fact the ones. And this is quite manual. It's very difficult to be automated, and you would get surprised with the number of providers that they trust the letters of authorities, which is one PDF where he says, I have this network, and there are those who trust the value of the PDF. That is not a formed letter, but a PDF. There is a very good investigation by a Japanese investigator who says, who reconstructs a number of incidents with the fakes, with the falsified letters. In China and several other countries where they use variable systems, they would send letters with rare characters which would not say anything. There was one which was a cable TV contract with Arabic digits. That was the only one to understood. At this level, they announced the routes at the internet, and that is quite difficult. And when you have the large carriers, tier 1, so many networks have to be checked, and sometimes that is not possible. And then they have a more automatic mechanism for that. There are more formal mechanisms to do it. What can we do about that? In fact, there are two actions to be taken. Let's say that there is no extreme mechanism. That's true. First, as internet users, I haven't got any mechanisms to announce or to tell to the world that these are my networks. This is a mechanism where each operator at the internet says, well, these are my networks. These are my networks, and I will announce that autonomous system. The origin of that will be the autonomous system. And describing that, and describing the system, what we have is a database called repository, and that has a type of server where all micro contracts are present. Those mini contracts, we call them routers, ROV. Why is this APKI? That is a row of IPKA with certificates, and that gives authorities. But for the effects of the routers, they are separated by origins. What happens between the PKI and the pointer? That is an element known as cache. A cache is an element which is not in the router, where we'll have 2 or 3 per ROV. When you go down with the repository and produces that for the route. What happens once the routers get the announcements? They will apply the same BGP, and they will compare that to that database from the repository. They know that as origin validation. And the BGP feature implemented. We have to validate the origin of the announcements and also provide a cache so the router can feed from repositories. What happens? They compare that to that database that says about prefix and origins, and they will sign what is a validated state, which is a BGP attribute. After, I will be able to use that in my router maps to take decisions. The valid states, we have valid, invalid, and unknown. The words are overloaded. They are emotional words. People believe that by being invalid, they will be discarded by the router. But that's not quite the configuration. By default is that they do not do anything. They just validate. They mark the prefix with the state of validity. If I want to do that, they have to mark that with a line. One can say that automatically they will discard the invalid ones. If there is a announcement and if they find the correct one, that will be valid. If they find the contradictions, if they find that prefix in that database in the cache, but if something that does not coincide, that will be an invalid one. And if I don't find it, they will be unknown. If it's unknown, I cannot say anything about that. There is a great discussion when people will discard that or not, but it will take quite a while. Some organizations they are discarding the invalids. This is the KPI, no further mystery. All structures are certified. There is no mystery. The only thing different here in this RPKI is that the certificates, they have extensions which are not present, and some directions for IP and autonomous systems. And to close, let me share some successful regional experiences. That is the first one, Ecuador. NAP Ecuador was one of the first ones in the world where RPKI and origin validation was used for production. That is a Kappa 3 with a router server, and they went after validation in the router server to know if that was stable, if it would not generate any problem. And they advanced, and finally they reached some discussions, and that was presented as a consensus by that community, and they decided that they would mark with communities those state of validity in a roadmap. If that is valid, they apply in a certain unit, and so on and so forth. And they tell communities what that is. After, what to do with those routes, this is a decision by each one of the team members. It sounds very interesting. That was my first experience, and they have been doing that for almost 5 years. That is a pre-request for new members to accept that community, for instance, and to form and create roles and authentications. Some more recent cases, CRIX, Costa Rica, .cr operators. They gave a step ahead from navigator standpoint, and they decided to do drops to discard the invalids at the router services. Operators decided to do that. They also have been through a phase of communities, and then they decided to do the discard. Renata in Colombia, an academic network, a large net. They are under the first stages of implementation, and they will go through the pathway of NAP Ecuador. And yesterday, talking to Hugo, I heard that Pete, Chile, are effectively implementing RPKI in their setting. Some statistics. This is the coverage of affirmed step in IPv4. The thing is to count the amount of IPv4, and then I fix how many of them will be covered by a role which validates them or invalidates them, and how they are protected. And then I ponderate that, and they will say that there are countries with very high coverage because of two reasons. The higher one is from Ecuador, where all operators are present in Ecuador. Somehow, they are obliged to do it. And after several countries where there is a dominant operator, such as in Uruguay and in Costa Rica. There are so many countries with the high coverages, so above 50%. How many? How many of them? The problem, though, is that in general they are small countries in South America. China and India, they are in black. I don't know, I think it was a copy-paste error only. And this red in the US happens because there is a pair of prefix like NIC, which is an artifact of the migration of Arena like NIC. the percentage is quite bad because comparing to all others, that's almost nothing. Countries in green, they have 100% and they are represented the smaller countries. With that, I conclude my presentation.
Bom dia, pessoal. Eu vou falar pouquinho sobre RPKI no Brasil.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about RPKI in Brazil. I have mentioned some of that at the GTER list. RPKI support in the country that is integrated to activities performed in Chile, like PTI in Chile, IX in Brazil. We are deciding about invalid ones. RPKI is a medium to long run action because there is no support in the Brazilian NIR. And now I will share what we are doing to solve that. As to our interface of numbering, we are quite advanced, and that will allow better usability, DNSSEC support. Regions, they supported that for quite a while, but today we cannot collect DS throughout the PP protocol to LACNIC, but that is being implemented, and it is one of the first things that will be working, and the same interface will be prepared for RPKI. We'll have conditions to do provisioning in a delegated or hosted situation in the future, that it will be in operation before the next GTER. As to RPKI, what is the software to be used? RPKI tools that is under development by NEL Net Labs, that is being supported by NIC.br and by RIPE CC. This URL, you can get information about the project, development plan, and roadmap for the software. The first version in the roadmap will happen next December, which is aligned to those dates of when we will introduce the service in the BR point. There are two modes of operation. One of them is the delegated one, which works via a provisional protocol, up-down protocol defined in the RFC. The first institution to use that operational model was APNIC. They also have NIRS. Such a protocol is a simple one of SMS messages encoded in XMLs about HTTP. There is nothing exceptional about that. Authentication to the protocol is usually set up out of band. The other operational model is the hosted one, where you delegate to third parties the control of the cryptographic material, rows, and so on, via web interface. LACNIC does that to some customers in the region. Delegated CA, that's how we start working in .br. Authentication will be configured by the numbering interface, which will be prepared for that. We also implement right away a monitoring system and alert for invalid rows. Rows are OAs, right? DNS delegation, DNSSEC delegation, where we constantly monitor and report it. When we make RPKI available, that will be no different. We'll keep on monitoring it and to keep that in a directory system to publish that, and we'll also notify if there is invalid addresses. Beta in coordination with NIC will take place next September. That depends on NIC and NIC.br development, which is implementing the up-down protocols. And we hope to have that system under production by the end of next year. And we're planning to have RPKI tutorials during this event. This then was the first step. Second, RPKA with hosted cells. What is a delegated one? Those who would like to use RPKI from the very beginning will need to have one installed. They will have to manage their cryptographic material, and they will have to do that. We hope that to happen in the second semester, where we'll have a model in a subordinated CA and a host of that cryptographic material to clients. And ROAS will be issued by the numbering interface. That depends on multi-CA RPKA tools. And production will be on 2020, second semester. That's it, guys, for now. And I think we still have some time for questions addressing either this deployment or RPKI in general. Carlos and myself can try to answer to your questions. Thank you.
Perguntas, pessoal? Douglas.
Questions? Fred, you mentioned that we will have the delegated mode and the hosted one. To the delegated mode, to do some time of automation, to generate ROAS, ROAS, that it's easier, but it's quite a responsibility. In the more coherent one mode, the delegated one, the automation is web interface. And I guess that within that context, you forecast some sort of interface allowing automation, API, I don't know, or some other tool. And that's exactly my question. Those with received the resources, they'll be able to manipulate those delegations and RPKI delegations and ROA throughout some automation. I did not describe, but in the RPKI tools, you can get much information. The first software version makes available two interfaces. One interface to talk to other CAs, that is the up-down protocol, but there is an interface in web service to generate and to manage that system. And NIC.br will talk to that CA installed to our system, and there will be a web interface. If someone first can just use the delegated mode. They can have a web interface to manage their roles, and also there will be a web service interface to automate that CA, but still they'll have to host that encrypted material and that CA internally. When the software supports multiple CAs, we'll have a second one at NIC.br where we can host the service and exclusively with a web interface, at least in the first moment we are willing to do it. If we have a web service available or not in the future, well, just the future will tell us. Well, but anyhow, for those that would like to automate it, CA is the best one. Our effort and the RIPE in CC to help the N labs to develop softwares, it's because unfortunately we have a small amount of free software available for RPKI. We have RIPE implementations and we have what has been done in the United States of the robousting, about robousting. And the quality of the existing software, the effort of Net Labs is that this implementation known as RPKI tools would be of excellent quality as the whole software. That will be very simple to run within the ISPs. I have a comment. In Rosario, I participated at a lecture in Rosario, and they mentioned that at LACNIC there are 12,000 prefixes, 2,000 invalid ROAs, and unfortunately Brazil so far has not an available infrastructure, but it has a great advantage. There is no invalid prefix. So we start from zero, right? And the comment that I'd like to make is regarding to keep talking about training. We are starting from zero. We are fresh. And we see people generating certificates in the gold ads and they make it wrong. Come on. So training has to be endless. I guess that this integration is a good idea, but that is a request that I make regarding training, more training, exhaustively training. So as there are no more questions, let's thank... I'd like to make a comment about invalids. ROAs are not invalids; they are valids. What we have are invalid routes. And I have an additional comment, which is routers. The LACNIC region is the region with more invalid routers. And when you analyze those invalid routers, you see that almost all of them have a valid route less specific than others. So if I decided to discard them as invalid, there is no connectivity loss. And I have a more optimistic view about the invalid rows. We always keep complaining about disaggregation. And now I ask myself, couldn't that mechanism work as someone that will help to deal with those more specific routes? We all know that we could use the expert communities, but not we do not use that as we could. Out of those 2,000 invalids, 1,500 of them are generated by one single organization, which I prefer not to mention here. So invalid routes that we see in the internet, they are the most specific ones, which they shouldn't exist because they do not care about anything else, right? Yes, I agree. Thank you for your comment and answer. Hi, my name is Victor. I have a question to both of you. It was said here, it was mentioned about communities to mark valid versus invalid routes. But there are ways to are there ways to stimulate the adoption of RPKI? I've heard or I've read somewhere. Well, he is rephrasing his question, I suppose. You've talked about communities, routers, map. He forgot his question. He lost his thought. I'll try to remember what my question was. Well, during the coffee break, I reach you. I'll try to remember my question. I remember now. I'm sorry. There is a decision algorithm for the best ways of BGP, which analyzes the attributes. RPKI could be used as a way to decide for the best route. Who's got the preference? Have you heard about anything like that on draft or RFC or something like that? I think that's what he meant. Yeah, that's exactly an attribute and an additional step of the decision agreement when the RPKI is skilled at the router. When you have a roadmap, what you are doing, you are evaluating preferences. The validity test or status is an additional checking. The community tools is a way to motivate RPKA deployment. The software images of those routers which support origin validation maybe is not the one that most operators are running after. And in some cases, they may request memory or hardware or some router of some brand that does not support it. The tools community is to express the RPKI where all router that opens BGP RPKI will understand. This is a way to foster the origin option, translating that information to something where some BGP can validate communities by routers. This is a way to make that more accessible. So you mean those communities, they would be marked as a bogon, they would be discarded or less preferred? Well, it depends on your policy as operator. You can do whatever you feel like. You can discard, you can propagate, you can mark them again. That depends and varies from case by case. Okay, thank you. I have a brief comment about your question. Attributes in BGP choice does not solve one of the problems, which is to announce more specific prefixes, but invalid ones. Those specific ones, they will win from those more comprehensive, regardless of the BGP choice. So we still have some issues to consider, which does not just involve a BGP algorithm. We have to see that from a broader perspective. So a big round of applause to our presenters. Thank you so much.